They say that attending your ex-husband's wedding to the woman he cheated on you with is a special kind of torture. And they're right. But what they don't tell you is that sometimes that torture leads to the most satisfying justice you could ever imagine. I'm standing at the back of an elegant ballroom, watching my ex-husband Derek marry Amber, the woman he left me for, and in about 20 minutes, a drunk businessman is going to stand up and say something that will destroy both of their lives. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this all began. 6 months ago, I sat in a lawyer's office signing the final papers of my divorce. My hand was shaking so badly that I could barely hold the pen. Across the table sat Derek, my husband of 8 years, looking impatient and checking his phone every 30 seconds. Next to him sat his lawyer, a shark in an expensive suit who had made the entire process as painful as possible. My own lawyer, a kind woman named Jennifer who had worked with me on payment plans because I couldn't afford her usual rates, squeezed my shoulder gently as I signed my name on the final page. It was done. 8 years of marriage erased with a signature. Derek didn't even wait for me to leave the building before he was on his phone, probably calling Amber to tell her the good news. I walked to my car in the parking garage, got inside, and sat there for 20 minutes, unable to drive because the tears wouldn't stop coming. This wasn't how my life was supposed to turn out. This wasn't the future I had imagined when Derek and I stood at a small altar 10 years ago and promised to love each other forever. Let me tell you about how we met, because it matters. Understanding who we were makes it so much more devastating to see what we became. 10 years ago, I was 25 years old, working as a freelance graphic designer and spending most of my time in a coffee shop near my apartment. I wasn't making much money, but I loved what I did. Creating visual stories, building brands from nothing, seeing my designs come to life. It felt like magic. One Tuesday afternoon, a man sat down at the table next to mine and ordered the most complicated coffee I'd ever heard. I remember thinking he must be exhausting to be around if his coffee order was that specific. But then he smiled at me, this warm, genuine smile that made his whole face light up, and said, "I'm sorry if my order was ridiculous. I'm running on about 3 hours of sleep and I need all the caffeine I can chemically engineer into 1 cup." I laughed, and just like that, we started talking. His name was Derek Lopez, and he was 27 years old, working on starting his own tech consulting business. He had this energy about him, this excitement for life and possibilities that was absolutely infectious. We talked for 2 hours that day, and when he asked for my number, I gave it to him without hesitation. Our first date was at a small Italian restaurant that neither of us could really afford. Derek showed up with flowers, not expensive roses, but a simple bouquet of daisies because, as he explained, roses felt like he was trying too hard and he wanted me to know he was just genuinely interested in getting to know me. We talked through dinner, through dessert, through 3 cups of coffee after dessert, until the restaurant staff started putting chairs up on tables around us. He walked me home that night, and at my doorstep, he said something I'll never forget. "Maya, I don't know what's happening here, but I feel like I just met someone who's going to change my life. Is it okay if I call you tomorrow?" He called the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. Within 3 months, we were inseparable. Within 6 months, we were living together. Within a year, Derek's business started taking off, and I was designing all of his marketing materials, his website, his brand identity. We were a team, building something together, and it felt like we were unstoppable. When Derek proposed 2 years after we met, he did it in that same coffee shop where we'd first talked. He got down on one knee right next to the table where I'd been sitting that Tuesday afternoon, and he said, "Maya-chan, you're the most talented, kind, beautiful person I've ever known. Will you marry me and let me spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you?" I said yes before he even finished the question. Our wedding was small and perfect. 50 people in a garden venue, handwritten vows, a cake that my best friend Rachel baked because we couldn't afford a fancy bakery. When Derek said his vows, he promised to always be honest, always be faithful, and always remember that we were partners in everything. I believed every word. The first 5 years of our marriage were genuinely happy. Derek's business grew steadily, and I continued taking on design clients while also serving as his unofficial creative director. We worked long hours, but we worked them together. We celebrated every small victory and supported each other through every setback. We talked about having children someday, about buying a house with a big backyard, about growing old together. Then, 3 years ago, Derek made what he called the best business decision of his life. He brought on a business partner named Amber Cross. I remember the day he told me about her. He came home excited, talking rapidly the way he did when something good happened. "Maya, I met this incredible woman today. She's got an MBA from Wharton, 5 years of experience in tech consulting, and she wants to invest in the company and become a partner. This could take us to the next level." I was happy for him, happy for us. The business had plateaued a bit, and fresh energy and expertise sounded like exactly what we needed. When Derek asked if I wanted to meet her, I said absolutely. Amber came to our house for dinner the next week. She was beautiful in that polished, professional way that made you feel slightly inadequate without her having to say a word. Tall, blonde, perfectly styled, with the kind of confidence that comes from always being the smartest person in the room. She complimented our home, my cooking, the design work I'd done for Derek's company. She seemed genuinely nice, and I wanted to like her because Derek was clearly excited about this partnership. Over the next few months, Amber became a fixture in our lives. She and Derek worked long hours together, traveled to meet with potential clients, strategized about the company's future. I was happy to see the business thriving. The contracts got bigger, the revenue increased, and Derek seemed energized in a way he hadn't been in years. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. Derek started working later, not occasionally but consistently. 3 nights a week became 4, then 5. Weekend work sessions became routine. When I suggested we plan a vacation, something we hadn't done in over a year, Derek said the timing wasn't right. There was always another deal to close, another client to impress, another reason why he needed to be in the office or traveling with Amber. I noticed other small things too. Derek bought new clothes, more expensive and fashionable than his usual style. He joined a gym and started working out regularly, which I encouraged because I thought it was good for his stress levels. He changed his cologne to something I didn't recognize. He was on his phone constantly, but he started keeping it face down on every surface and taking calls in other rooms. When I asked if everything was okay, if we were okay, Derek seemed annoyed by the question. "Everything's fine, Maya. I'm just busy building our future." "I thought you'd be supportive of that." The way he said, "I thought you'd be supportive," made me feel guilty for even asking. So I stopped asking. I told myself I was being paranoid, that success required sacrifice, that this was temporary. I threw myself into my own work, took on more clients, tried to be the understanding wife who didn't complain about her husband's ambition. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. You always know, don't you? You feel it before you can prove it, before you have evidence, before anyone else sees it. I felt Derek slipping away from me, and I had no idea how to hold on to him. The discovery came on a Saturday morning, exactly 3 years and 2 months after Amber joined the company. Derek had gone to the gym, or so he said, and I was doing laundry. I picked up his jacket to check the pockets before washing it, and I found a hotel receipt. The Belmont Hotel, known for being one of the most romantic and expensive hotels in the city. Room 412, checked in Friday night, checked out Saturday morning. Yesterday's date. My hands started shaking as I looked at that receipt. Derek had told me he was working late at the office on Friday, that he might just sleep on the couch there because he didn't want to wake me when he came home exhausted. But this receipt told a different story. I went to our home office and opened Derek's laptop. I'd never snooped on him before, never felt the need to, but that receipt had broken something open inside me and I needed to know the truth. His email was still logged in. I felt sick doing it, felt like I was violating his privacy, but I started scrolling through his messages. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. An email thread between Derek and Amber, with a subject line that was just a heart emoji. I clicked on it and my entire world collapsed. Months of messages. Hundreds of them. "Can't wait to see you tonight. Last night was incredible. I hate that we have to hide this. Soon we won't have to pretend anymore. I love you. I love you too." I sat there reading through their entire relationship, documented in emails and text messages that Derek had been careless enough to leave accessible. The affair had been going on for 18 months. 18 months of lies, of Derek coming home and kissing me hello while planning his next secret meeting with Amber. 18 months of me making dinner and asking about his day while he texted her under the table. 18 months of me sleeping next to a man who was living a completely double life. The worst part wasn't even the affair itself. It was reading how they talked about me. "Is Maya suspicious?" Amber would ask. "No, she's clueless," Derek would respond. "She just accepts whatever I tell her. It's almost too easy." They laughed about how naive I was, how trusting, how I never questioned Derek's increasingly obvious lies. When Derek came home from the gym that morning, I was sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open in front of me. He walked in all sweaty and energized, and when he saw what I was looking at, all the color drained from his face. "Maya, I can explain," he started. "Don't," I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. Inside I was screaming, but outside I was eerily composed. "Don't insult me by trying to explain this away. I've read everything. I know about the affair. I know it's been going on for 18 months. I know you're in love with her." Derek sat down across from me, and for a moment, he looked like he might try to deny it or minimize it. But then something shifted in his expression, and he just looked tired. "I didn't mean for this to happen, Maya. It just happened." "Nothing just happens, Derek. You made choices. Hundreds of them. Every time you lied to me, every time you met with her, every time you came home and pretended everything was fine. Those were all choices." We sat in silence for a long moment. Then Derek said the words that destroyed what was left of my heart. "I love her, Maya. I'm sorry, but Amber and we just connect on a different level. She understands the business, understands my ambitions in a way that—" He trailed off, but I knew what he wasn't saying. "In a way that you don't." I stood up from the table. "I want you to move out. Today. Pack your things and leave." Derek looked almost relieved that I was making it easy for him. He didn't fight me, didn't beg me to reconsider, didn't promise it was over with Amber. He just nodded and went upstairs to pack. As I watched him load suitcases into his car an hour later, I realized that the man I had married, the one who had proposed in a coffee shop and promised to always be honest, was gone. In his place was a stranger who had betrayed me without remorse and was now eager to start his new life with the woman he'd chosen over me. The divorce proceedings started a week later. Derek hired an aggressive lawyer who made it clear that they wanted this resolved quickly and cleanly. Derek's offer seemed fair on the surface. We would split our personal assets 50-50. I would keep the house we'd bought together, along with half of our savings. Derek would keep his company, which was valued at $2 million by an independent appraiser. Since Amber owned 40% as a partner and Derek owned 60%, I would receive half of Derek's share, essentially $600,000 from the business valuation, minus fees and adjustments that brought it down to about $500,000. Jennifer, my lawyer, reviewed the terms and said they seemed reasonable given that Derek had built the company before we married and I had never been an official employee. I was so emotionally exhausted, so desperate to just end the nightmare and move on with my life, that I didn't question it. I just wanted it to be over. I signed the papers. We finalized the divorce. And just like that, 8 years of marriage ended with signatures and legal documents. Within a week of the divorce being final, Derek and Amber announced their engagement on social media. The post was a photo of them on a beach somewhere tropical. Amber's hand extended to show off a massive engagement ring, both of them grinning like they'd won the lottery. The caption was something about new beginnings and finally free to love openly. I saw it because mutual friends kept sending it to me, thinking I'd want to know, not realizing that every notification was like a knife to the chest. The months after the divorce were the darkest of my life. I moved into a smaller apartment because even with keeping the house, I couldn't afford the mortgage on my own and didn't want to live somewhere filled with memories of Derek anyway. I threw myself into work, taking on as many design projects as I could find, trying to fill every hour so I wouldn't have time to think about how completely my life had fallen apart. My best friend Rachel was my lifeline during this time. She came over at least 3 times a week with food and wine and terrible reality TV shows that we'd watch while she let me cry and rage and question everything about myself. Rachel was an accountant, practical and logical, and she kept reminding me that Derek's betrayal was about his character, not my worth. But it was hard to believe that when I kept seeing evidence of Derek and Amber's perfect new life together. They posted constantly on social media, luxury vacations to the Maldives and Paris, a new Tesla that Amber drove, dinners at restaurants that cost more per meal than my monthly grocery budget. They looked blissfully happy, like two people who had finally found their perfect match and were living their best life. I tried to be happy for them, or at least indifferent. I tried to tell myself that I'd moved on, that I was better off without a man who could betray me so easily. But late at night, alone in my small apartment, I couldn't help wondering if maybe Derek had been right. Maybe Amber was better suited for him. Maybe I had been holding him back. Maybe I wasn't enough. For months after the divorce, I received a wedding invitation in the mail. Thick, expensive cardstock with gold lettering. Derek Lopez and Amber Cross request the pleasure of your company at their wedding. The date was set for 6 weeks away, at one of the most exclusive venues in the city. I stared at that invitation for a full hour, trying to understand why they would send it to me. Was it cruelty? Was it some twisted desire to rub their happiness in my face? Or was it something else? Maybe Derek's attempt at showing there were no hard feelings, that we could all be mature adults about this situation. Rachel came over that night and found me still holding the invitation, tears streaming down my face. She grabbed it out of my hands and actually growled. "They invited you to their wedding? Are you kidding me? The audacity of these people. You're not going, obviously. We're going to burn this invitation and use it to roast marshmallows." But as Rachel ranted about what terrible people they were, something inside me shifted. A small voice in my head whispered that maybe I should go. Not to cause a scene or to wallow in my heartbreak, but because something felt unfinished. Something felt wrong about how quickly Derek and Amber had moved on, about how extravagant their lifestyle had become in just a few months, about how they could afford all of this when Derek's business had supposedly only been worth $2 million. "What if I went?" I said quietly, interrupting Rachel's tirade. She stopped mid-sentence and stared at me. "What? Maya, no. That's insane. Why would you torture yourself like that?" "I don't know. I feel like I need to. Like there's something I'm missing, and I won't be able to move forward until I figure out what it is." Rachel sat down next to me, her anger replaced by concern. "Sweetie, the only thing you're missing is a cheating ex-husband and his homewrecker girlfriend. You don't need to see them get married to get closure." But I couldn't shake the feeling. Over the next few days, it grew stronger. I started really looking at Derek and Amber's social media posts, and Rachel's earlier observation kept echoing in my head. How could they afford all of this? The Maldives vacation alone probably cost $50,000. The Tesla was at least $80,000. The engagement ring looked like it cost more than my entire divorce settlement. Derek's business was successful, but not that successful. I knew because I'd designed all their marketing materials for years. I knew their client base, their revenue streams, their profit margins. Even with growth, they shouldn't have been living like millionaires. I called Rachel and asked her to come over. When she arrived, I had my laptop open with spreadsheets and calculations covering the screen. "Okay, you know I'm an accountant, so I love a good spreadsheet," Rachel said. "But this looks a little obsessive, even for me. What are we looking at?" "I've been tracking Derek and Amber's spending based on their social media posts and what I know about their lifestyle. Rachel, the numbers don't add up. Even if the business has grown, even if they're both taking maximum salaries, they're spending way more than they should be able to afford." Rachel sat down and started looking through my calculations. Her expression grew more serious as she reviewed each page. Finally, she looked up at me. "Maya, I think you might be onto something. If what you're showing me is accurate, and their business was really only worth $2 million, there's no way they could sustain this spending pattern. Either they have income sources you don't know about, or the business valuation was wrong," I finished. We sat there in silence, the implications hanging between us. If the business had been undervalued during the divorce, that meant Derek and Amber had potentially defrauded me. They had hidden assets to avoid giving me my fair share in the settlement. "Maya, you need to talk to a forensic accountant," Rachel said firmly. Someone who specializes in uncovering hidden assets in divorce cases. Because if they did this deliberately, you might have grounds to reopen the divorce settlement. The next day, I made an appointment with a forensic accountant named James Morrison. His office was small and cluttered, with files stacked on every surface and a whiteboard covered in numbers and diagrams. James himself was in his late 40s, balding, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He looked like someone who spent more time with spreadsheets than with people, which was exactly what I needed. I explained the situation, the divorce, the business valuation, the excessive spending I'd observed. James listened carefully, taking notes, asking occasional questions about specific numbers and timelines. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said, "Mrs. Chan, I'm going to be honest with you. What you're describing is a pattern I've seen before in high-asset divorces. One spouse hides the true value of a business or asset to avoid sharing it fairly. If that happened here, it's fraud, and you would have grounds to pursue legal action. But investigating this will be expensive, and there's no guarantee we'll find anything definitive." "How expensive?" I asked, already knowing the answer would be more than I could afford. "My initial investigation would cost around $10,000. If we find evidence of fraud and need to do deeper analysis, it could go higher. And that's before any legal fees if you decide to sue." I felt my hope deflating. I didn't have $10,000 to spend on an investigation that might lead nowhere. My savings from the divorce settlement were earmarked for living expenses while I built up my freelance business. I couldn't afford to gamble that money on what might be a wild goose chase. James must have seen the disappointment on my face because he said, "Tell you what, give me the basic financial documents you have from the divorce, the business valuation, the settlement agreement, anything else relevant. Let me do a preliminary review at no cost. If I see red flags that suggest fraud, we can talk about moving forward. If everything looks legitimate, then at least you'll know for sure and you can move on." I wanted to hug him. Instead, I thanked him profusely and promised to send over all the documents that evening. Over the next 2 weeks, while I waited for James to complete his review, I couldn't stop thinking about the wedding invitation. It sat on my kitchen counter, a constant reminder that in 4 weeks, Derek would marry the woman he'd left me for. Part of me wanted to throw it away and never think about it again. But another part of me, the part that was starting to suspect I'd been cheated in more ways than one, wanted to go. I wanted to see them. I wanted to see if they showed any guilt or remorse. I wanted to observe their guests and their lifestyle up close. And maybe, just maybe, I wanted to gather more evidence for whatever James might find. When James called me 3 weeks before the wedding, his voice was excited in a way that probably wasn't appropriate given the circumstances. "Maya, I found something. Several somethings, actually. I think you need to come to my office." I drove there immediately, my heart pounding. James had his whiteboard filled with diagrams and numbers, with arrows connecting different entities and dates. "Okay," he began. "I started by looking at the business valuation that was done during your divorce. The appraiser valued the company at $2 million based on revenue, assets, and projected growth. On paper, it looks reasonable. But then I started digging into public records and business filings, and that's where things get interesting." He pointed to a timeline on the whiteboard. 3 weeks before your divorce was finalized, Derek's company signed a major contract with Wilson Technologies. This contract is a matter of public record because Wilson Technologies is a publicly traded company and has to disclose significant vendor agreements. The contract is worth $15 million over 3 years. My mind was reeling. 15 million? But that would mean the business is worth way more than $2 million. Exactly. A contract of that size fundamentally changes the valuation of a company. With that contract in place, the business should have been valued at $8 to $10 million minimum, maybe more. Which means your share should have been somewhere between $2 and $3 million, not $500,000. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. So Derek and Amber knew about this contract during the divorce and hid it? James pulled out printed emails that he'd obtained through public records requests and business filings. It's worse than that. Based on the timeline, Derek was actively negotiating this contract during your divorce proceedings. There are emails between Derek and Wilson Technologies executives dating back more than a year. He knew this deal was coming, and he structured the divorce to finalize before the contract was publicly announced. Can we prove he did this deliberately? That's the tricky part. I'd need access to Derek's internal emails and communications to prove he intentionally hid the contract from the divorce proceedings. But the timeline is extremely suspicious. And there's more. James pointed to another section of his whiteboard. I found evidence of shell companies and offshore accounts connected to Derek's business. These weren't disclosed during the divorce either. I can't tell how much money is in these accounts without subpoena power, but their existence suggests a pattern of hiding assets. I sat down heavily in the chair across from his desk. What do I do now? You need a lawyer who specializes in post-divorce fraud cases. You have grounds to sue for fraudulent concealment of assets. The statute of limitations varies by state, but typically you have a few years from discovering the fraud. You're well within that window. How much will this cost? James grimaced. For a case this size, with the amount of money potentially involved, you'd be looking at significant legal fees. Many lawyers would take it on contingency, meaning they only get paid if you win, but they'd take a percentage of any recovery. Usually around 30 to 40%. 30% of $2 million was still over $600,000. More than I'd gotten in the entire divorce settlement. Even after lawyer fees, I'd come out significantly ahead if we won. There's something else, James said. If we can prove that Derek and Amber deliberately defrauded you, they could face criminal charges. Financial fraud in a divorce proceeding is a serious crime. I thought about Derek and Amber, living their lavish life, posting their perfect photos, completely confident that they'd gotten away with cheating me. And I thought about that wedding invitation, still sitting on my kitchen counter. James, I need you to keep investigating. Find me everything you can. I'm going to find a lawyer and I'm going to sue them for everything they tried to steal from me. Are you sure you're ready for this? It's going to be a long, difficult fight. They'll come at you hard, try to make you look bad, drag this out as long as possible. I thought about the last 6 months. The loneliness, the self-doubt, the nights spent wondering if I was the problem. The way Derek and Amber had talked about me in their emails, like I was stupid and naive and deserving of being deceived. I'm sure they took advantage of my trust and my heartbreak. They bet that I'd be too broken to fight back. They were wrong. Over the next 2 weeks, I met with 3 different attorneys who specialized in post-divorce fraud cases. I chose a woman named Patricia Chan, no relation, who had a reputation as a pit bull in the courtroom. She reviewed James's findings and agreed to take my case on contingency. This is one of the more clear-cut cases of divorce fraud I've seen, Patricia told me. The timeline alone is damning. But Maya, you need to prepare yourself for this to get ugly. Derek and Amber will fight this with everything they have. They'll try to paint you as a vindictive ex-wife who can't move on. They'll try to discredit the evidence. They'll make you relive the worst moments of your marriage. Are you ready for that? I'm ready, I said, and I meant it. But we decided to wait to file the lawsuit. Patricia explained that the element of surprise would work in our favor. Let them think they got away with it. Let them get comfortable. Meanwhile, we'll build an airtight case. When we finally file, it'll hit them like a freight train. Which brought me back to the wedding invitation. The wedding was now just 1 week away, and I still hadn't RSVP'd. Patricia's eyes lit up when I mentioned it. You should go, she said. Really? I thought you'd tell me to stay away. Normally I would. But this is a unique situation. These people are celebrating their fraud. They're surrounding themselves with business partners and associates who might say things, reveal information that could be useful to our case. Sometimes people get careless when they're celebrating, especially if there's alcohol involved. Go to the wedding, keep your eyes and ears open, and report back anything interesting you hear. So I RSVP'd yes. 1 guest. No +1. Rachel thought I was insane. My other friends thought I was a glutton for punishment. But I knew what I was doing. I was walking into Derek and Amber's celebration with knowledge they didn't know I had. I was armed with the truth, and I was about to watch them parade their lies in front of everyone they knew. I bought a simple navy dress for the wedding, nothing flashy or attention-seeking. I wanted to blend in, observe, and listen. The wedding was on a Saturday evening at the Grandview Estate, a venue so expensive that just booking it probably cost more than most people's entire weddings. The day of the wedding, I almost lost my nerve 3 separate times. I stood in front of my mirror, looking at myself in that navy dress, wondering what I was doing. Was this closure? Was this evidence gathering? Or was this just me being unable to let go? But then I thought about those emails James had found. The timeline that proved Derek had deliberately timed our divorce to hide his windfall. The shell companies and offshore accounts. The $2 million that should have been mine. And I walked out the door. The Grandview Estate was even more impressive in person. Manicured gardens, a fountain that looked like it belonged at Versailles, and a mansion that had been converted into an event space. Luxury cars filled the parking lot, Mercedes, BMWs, Teslas, even a Bentley. This was a celebration of wealth and success, and everyone here was part of Derek and Amber's world of money and business. I walked in and immediately felt out of place. The other guests were dressed in designer clothes, dripping with jewelry, talking loudly about their businesses and investments and vacation homes. I recognized some of them, people who had been at parties Derek and I hosted when we were married. A few gave me surprised looks, probably wondering why the ex-wife was at the wedding. The ceremony was in the garden. 200 white chairs arranged in perfect rows, an arch covered in white roses that probably cost more than my monthly rent, a string quartet playing classical music. I took a seat in the back, trying to be invisible. Derek looked handsome in his tuxedo, standing at the altar with his best man. He was smiling and confident, exactly like he'd looked on our wedding day 10 years ago. For a moment, I felt the old pain rise up, the memory of loving him, of believing in our future together. But I pushed it down. That man was gone, if he'd ever really existed at all. Then Amber appeared, walking down the aisle in a wedding dress that probably cost more than a car. She looked triumphant, like someone who had won a hard-fought prize. When she reached the altar and took Derek's hands, they both looked so happy that I almost felt guilty for what I knew was coming. The officiant began the ceremony, talking about love and commitment and building a life together. Derek and Amber exchanged vows they had written themselves. Derek promised to be Amber's partner in all things, to support her dreams, to build an empire together. Amber promised to push Derek to be his best self, to never let him settle for less than he deserved, to always choose honesty and transparency. The irony of that last line, honesty and transparency, was almost too much to bear. I looked around to see if anyone else caught it, but everyone was smiling and dabbing at their eyes. No one else knew what I knew. No one else saw the fraud hiding behind the facade. They were pronounced husband and wife, kissed to enthusiastic applause, and walked back down the aisle together while the string quartet played something triumphant and joyous. As they passed my row, Amber saw me. Our eyes met for just a second, and I saw surprise flash across her face. She clearly hadn't expected me to actually come. But then she smiled, a tight little smile that said she'd won, and there was nothing I could do about it. Oh, Amber, I thought, you have no idea what's coming. The reception was in the mansion's ballroom, a space so ornate it looked like something from a period drama. Crystal chandeliers, gold leaf on the walls, a dance floor that gleamed like glass. Round tables were set with china and crystal that probably cost more per place setting than I'd spent on my entire divorce lawyer. I found my assigned seat at a table near the back with people I didn't recognize, probably business associates or distant relatives who didn't rate seats closer to the happy couple. The conversation at my table was superficial and boring, people talking about their businesses and their children's private schools. I smiled and nodded, playing the role of a polite guest while keeping my attention on the front of the room where Derek and Amber sat at a head table, surrounded by their wedding party. Dinner was served, some kind of fancy chicken dish that was probably delicious but that I could barely taste. I was too focused on watching and listening. At nearby tables, I heard business partners discussing contracts and deals. I heard Derek's parents talking to Amber's parents about how perfect the couple was together. I heard the maid of honor practicing her speech under her breath. And then the toasts began. The best man went first, telling funny stories about Derek in college that I'd heard before. The maid of honor gushed about Amber's success and beauty and how Derek was so lucky to have her. Derek's father gave a short speech about being proud of his son's accomplishments. Each speech was met with applause and laughter, and Derek and Amber soaked it all in, looking like the king and queen of their own perfect kingdom. Then the MC, a professional who Derek and Amber had probably paid thousands of dollars to orchestrate the evening, stepped up to the microphone. "We have one more surprise toast this evening," he announced. "Please welcome Mr. Richard Chun, CEO of Wilson Technologies." My attention snapped into focus. Wilson Technologies, that was the company with the $15 million contract. The one Derek had hidden during our divorce. I watched as a well-dressed man in his 60s, clearly several drinks into the evening based on his slightly unsteady walk, made his way to the microphone. Richard Chun took the microphone and grinned at the crowd. "Good evening, everyone. I'm Rich Chun, and I've had the pleasure of working with Derek for—" "Oh, how long has it been now, Derek?" Derek smiled, but I could see tension in his shoulders. He clearly hadn't expected Richard to give a speech. "Must be almost 2 years now since we first started talking." Richard continued, his words slightly slurred. "Derek Lopez is one of the smartest negotiators I've ever met. Sharp as a tack, that one." The crowd laughed and applauded. Derek relaxed a bit, probably thinking this would just be a standard business congratulations toast. "In fact," Richard went on, "I remember when we first started discussing our contract. It was, 18 months ago? Somewhere around there. And Derek was so focused during those negotiations. Even during his divorce proceedings, he never missed a meeting with us. Now that's dedication." I saw Derek's face change. The smile became fixed, artificial. Amber was gripping her champagne glass so tightly her knuckles had gone white. But Richard, gloriously oblivious and very drunk, kept talking. "I remember Derek telling me, and I'll never forget this," he said, "Rich, we need to keep this contract quiet until my divorce finalizes. My wife doesn't understand business." And we all laughed about it because, divorce is complicated and business is business. The room had gone quiet. People were starting to shift uncomfortably in their seats, sensing that something was off about this toast. A few guests glanced at me, recognizing me as the ex-wife in question. "Richard, maybe," Derek started to say, standing up from the head table. But Richard was on a roll. "And Amber, you were brilliant in those negotiations too. The way you two coordinated everything. The timing, the announcements, restructuring the company valuation before the divorce. Just masterful business strategy. Absolutely masterful." He raised his glass, completely unaware that he just confessed to fraud in front of 200 witnesses. "To Derek and Amber, the smartest business partners I know. You two outmaneuvered everyone, including the lawyers. Here's to your success." The silence in the ballroom was deafening. No one was raising their glasses. Everyone was staring at either Richard, Derek, or me. Some people were pulling out their phones, probably already texting friends about the drama unfolding. Derek had gone pale, all the color drained from his face. Amber was frantically pulling Richard away from the microphone, trying to laugh it off as if he was just a drunk guest saying silly things. But the damage was done. I stood up from my table. Every eye in the room turned to me. I walked calmly to the front of the ballroom, my heels clicking on the marble floor. The sound echoed in the silence like gunshots. When I reached the head table where Derek and Amber stood frozen, I smiled. Not a friendly smile, not a bitter smile, just a calm, knowing smile that said I had them exactly where I wanted them. "Thank you, Richard," I said loud enough for everyone to hear. That was the most illuminating toast I've ever heard. Then I turned to Derek and Amber, pulling an envelope from my small clutch purse. "Derek, Amber, I came here today hoping to find closure, hoping to see you happy and move on with my life. But Richard just confirmed what I've suspected for months." I placed the envelope on the table in front of them. "These are legal documents. I'm suing you both for fraud, for deliberate concealment of assets during our divorce proceedings, and for perjury. My forensic accountant has documented everything. The Wilson Technologies contract you hid, the shell companies, the offshore accounts, all of it." Derek tried to speak, but no words came out. Amber looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. You were right about one thing, Derek, I continued, my voice steady and clear. We did need a fresh start, but you built yours on lies and theft. I'm building mine on truth and justice. I looked around the ballroom at all the shocked faces, at the business partners who were undoubtedly wondering what other secrets Derek had been keeping, at the family members who looked mortified. Consider this my wedding gift to you both, I said. Legal accountability for your actions. See you in court. I walked out of that ballroom with my head held high, leaving behind 200 stunned guests and 2 people whose perfect day had just become their worst nightmare. Behind me, I could hear the eruption of voices, the exclamations and questions and chaos. I got in my car and drove home, and for the first time in 6 months, I felt genuinely happy. 2 months later, the lawsuit was in full swing. Richard Chen's drunken confession had gone viral. Someone had recorded it on their phone and leaked it online, and it had been viewed millions of times. Businessman accidentally confesses to fraud at his own wedding, read the headlines. Derek and Amber's perfect image was destroyed. The discovery phase of the lawsuit revealed even more than James had originally found. Derek had been systematically hiding money for years, not just during our marriage. The Wilson Technologies contract was just the tip of the iceberg. By the time Patricia's team finished their investigation, the hidden assets totaled over $6 million. Derek and Amber tried to fight the lawsuit at first. They hired expensive lawyers who filed motion after motion, trying to get the case dismissed or the evidence thrown out. But Richard's confession, combined with the timeline James had documented and the shell company paper trail, was impossible to refute. For months after I walked out of their wedding reception, Derek's lawyers approached Patricia about a settlement. They wanted to avoid a trial that would expose even more of their deception and potentially lead to criminal charges. Patricia negotiated brilliantly. The final settlement gave me $2.5 million, the amount I should have received in the original divorce, plus damages and interest. Additionally, Derek and Amber's company was forced to undergo an independent audit, which revealed more financial irregularities that hurt their business relationships and cost them several major clients. But the money wasn't even the most satisfying part. The most satisfying part was watching Derek and Amber's perfect life crumble under the weight of their own lies. Wilson Technologies pulled out of their contract, not wanting to be associated with people who had committed fraud. Other clients followed. Derek's reputation in the business community was ruined. No one wanted to work with someone who had proven they couldn't be trusted. And their marriage, built on the foundation of betraying someone else, started showing cracks almost immediately. The stress of the lawsuit, the financial problems, the public scandal, it was too much. I heard through mutual acquaintances that they were fighting constantly, each blaming the other for their predicament. 6 months after their wedding, I ran into Derek at a coffee shop. Not the one where we'd met. I'd never gone back there. A different one, across town from where I now lived in a beautiful condo I'd purchased with part of my settlement money. He looked terrible. He'd lost weight, his expensive clothes hanging loose on his frame. The confidence that had always defined him was gone, replaced by something that looked like defeat. "Maya," he said when he saw me. He looked like he wanted to say something more, maybe apologize or explain or justify. But what could he possibly say? "Derek," I replied politely, like he was an acquaintance I barely remembered. "I heard you're doing well," he said finally. "New design agency, new clients. Congratulations." "Thank you. I heard you and Amber are having some difficulties. I'm sorry about that." I wasn't sorry, not really, but I could afford to be gracious now. He looked at me with something like disbelief. "How can you be sorry after everything that happened?" "Because holding on to anger only hurts me, Derek. You and Amber destroyed your own lives. I didn't have to do anything except tell the truth. And now I'm free to build something better." I left him standing there and walked out into the sunshine, feeling lighter than I had in years. A year after the wedding crash, I'm sitting in my beautiful new office, overlooking the city. My design agency has 15 employees now, and we're booked solid for the next 6 months. I've started a blog helping recently divorced women navigate financial issues and spot the warning signs of asset hiding. The The blog has become so popular that I've been invited to speak at legal conferences about divorce fraud. I'm dating someone new, James, actually the forensic accountant who helped expose Derek's deception. He's kind and honest and refreshingly transparent about everything. When he travels for work, he calls me every night. When he makes a major decision, he asks for my input. The contrast with Derek is so stark it's almost funny. People sometimes ask me if I regret going to Derek and Amber's wedding. They want to know if it was painful, if I wish I'd just stayed home and avoided the whole spectacle. But I tell them the truth. Going to that wedding was the best decision I ever made. Not because of the revenge or the money, though both were satisfying, but because Richard Chen's drunken confession gave me the final piece of evidence I needed to prove what had been done to me. Because watching Derek's face turn pale as his fraud was exposed in front of everyone he wanted to impress showed me that the truth always comes to light eventually, no matter how deeply it's buried. I walked into that wedding reception broken and doubting myself. I walked out with the truth, and the truth set me free in ways I never imagined. Derek chose to build his future on lies. I chose to rebuild mine on honesty, and in the end, only one of those foundations could stand.